Will you join me in prayer? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Perhaps you all know well the story of Samuel's call, the story that Frank read for us, just a bit of it. But the story begins years before that with a childless woman named Hannah. Hannah petitions God for a child and promises that if she could have a son, she would place him in the care of the priest and dedicate his life to the Lord. And after years of prayers and petitions, when Hannah finally discovers she is going to have a child, she is delighted. She sings a song to God, very much like a similar woman, Mary, sings centuries later when she learns she is going to have a child. In both Mary's song and Hannah's song, these women imagine how the world is about to change for them and how it is about to change indeed for everyone. The hymn we sang together at the beginning of worship today echoes both the song of Mary and the song of Hannah. In that first verse of that hymn we sang, "My soul cries out with a joyful shout that the God of my heart is great, and my spirit sings of the wondrous things that you bring to the ones who wait. You fixed your sight on your servant's plight, and my weakness you did not spurn. So from east to west shall my name be blessed, could the world be about to turn." Samuel's story continues. When he's a small boy, his mother Hannah does indeed take him to the temple, and she dedicates him to service in the care of the priest Eli, which was perhaps a questionable decision considering that Eli and his sons were corrupt and their leadership of the people was failing. And yet there Samuel stays and serves and grows, spending his days doing what Eli tells him to do, spending his nights sleeping on the floor of the temple, until that one night when the young boy Samuel is awakened by a voice calling to him in the darkness. Samuel thinks it must be his master Eli calling out to him, so he goes to see what is needed, but Eli says, "No, I didn't call you, go back to sleep." 3 times this happens, and finally Eli realizes that it must be the voice of God calling to Samuel. So he tells Samuel, "Next time you hear the voice, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" And that's exactly what Samuel does. It's a great call story. One I have invoked many times in my work with those who are discerning a call to ministry and wanting to come to seminary. They, like Samuel, have heard a voice calling to them in the darkness. They, like Samuel, are eager to respond, "Speak, Lord." But here's the tough part of this story, the part that I just recently realized. When the Lord finally gets a chance to speak to Samuel, what Samuel hears is, well, it's not particularly good news. At least it's not good news for those of us who are like Eli and Hannah. You see, in that conversation in the darkness in the temple at night, God tells Samuel that the world is about to turn. God says that Eli's family is about to be thrown out of power and all the rules are about to be changed. God is about to give authority and leadership to someone new. And those who have clung to it for generations are about to be removed. You see, that's the problem with this story for us. We are the Hannahs and the Elis. We are the ones who have upheld the rules and the rituals and the traditions with the hope of passing this role on to our children and our grandchildren. And now God is speaking to a boy and telling that boy that everything we have held on to all our lives is about to be destroyed, about to be replaced with something new. That's the word that Samuel hears from God that night, that the world is about to turn. The institutions and those who have been in charge of them for generations are about to be disenfranchised. God is going to do something unexpected, something new, something different, something we who have been Eli and Hannah may not like. The way we know to be church isn't working anymore, and a new way of being church is about to begin. The way forward is not going to follow the path we expected or are familiar with, or trust, or know. The way forward is going to be very different from the way we have already come. You see, this is a hard word to hear for those of us who have been the bearers of privilege for generations. Whether we want to admit it or not, you and I, we are Hannah and Eli. We are the Pharisees in Mark's gospel, watching the disciples of Jesus harvest fruit from the fields on the Sabbath. We are rule followers, tradition bearers, law abiders. We pride ourselves on having elaborate constitutions and laws and due process for lawbreakers. But what happens when the rules outlive their usefulness? What do we do when human need proves the rule inadequate to protect or serve the very people we are called to love and to serve? Our laws help us as a society, as a denomination, as a congregation. They help us codify the way forward as best as we can imagine it at any given point in time when that law is created. But what happens when that historically rooted law no longer points to the way forward that is most faithful to who God is calling us to be now, and how God is calling us to act toward one another in this time, in this place? Jesus told the Pharisees the Sabbath was created for human beings. Human beings weren't created for the Sabbath. In other words, sometimes you have to put human need above the laws and the rules. Sometimes you have to simply throw out the rules if the rules aren't helping anymore. Sometimes you have to find new rituals of worship if the rituals you've been following have lost their meaning. Sometimes you have to find new ways of being church if the way you have been church for generations no longer serves you or the generations who follow. These are hard words for the Pharisees, for the Hannahs, for the Elis among us to hear. About a month ago, I had the opportunity to serve as a commissioner to the 223rd General Assembly in St. Louis, the biennial gathering of our denomination, our legislative session, if you will. And as the number suggests, this is the 223rd time that this legislative body has convened over the past 250 years or so to make rules and decide outcomes and imagine the future of Presbyterianism in America. And this past month, I sat on a committee called the Way Forward Committee. The 60 members of this committee heard reports from several groups of Presbyterians who have spent the last 2 years studying and praying and listening and discerning about what God might be doing in our denomination, what God is calling us to do now and to do next. In other words, I sat on a committee of 60 Pharisees and Elis and Hannahs. And we heard reports from a bunch of Samuels who heard a message from God in the darkness, and not all of it sounded like good news to us. Then we spent 4 days struggling with what we heard, and we asked ourselves some questions. How is God calling us to be church together in the days, weeks, months, years, decades ahead of us? How do we let go of the legalistic hold the past has on us and find our way forward? How do we recognize when the rules and laws that have guided us so well for so long are no longer working? How do we discern when it is okay to work on the Sabbath because hungry people need food and broken people need healing? We did our best to answer these questions in the 4 days we had and make our recommendations to the entire assembly for action. And if you want to hear the particular details of those decisions, invite me out for coffee sometime and I'll explain it all to you. It's fascinating. The only thing more fascinating than sitting in a 4-day committee meeting is hearing someone talk about sitting in a 4-day committee meeting. But I bring up my experience at the General Assembly with you this morning not to lift up what I did or even what the General Assembly finally decided. I bring it up as a way of asking you, this congregation, a similar question. What is your way forward? You are in a time of change, a time of pastoral transition, perhaps a time that may feel like the way forward is murky or unknown. Maybe some of you feel that the way forward veered away from the familiar path a long, long time ago and went in a direction you no longer understand. Maybe some of you feel like new possibilities are waiting, just about to break over you, bringing new energy and vitality, a new way of being God's faithful servants in this community. If only you could choose that road less traveled. However you think or feel about this moment of change, one thing is sure. The world is changing. The world has changed. You can't stop that from happening anymore. All you can do is discern what you will do about it, how you will respond to the changing. So let me ask you to ask yourselves, as your world changes, what rules, what behaviors, what practices are keeping you from what God is calling you to do and to be now and next? And what happens if you break those rules? If you change those behaviors? If you leave behind those practices that are holding you back or blocking your way forward? And what if God's voice, what if God's vision are given to new voices among you instead of the priests and Pharisees who have guided and guarded the church for generations? And what will you do if the Pharisees around you come after you and threaten you and challenge what you feel God is calling you to do? There is a story told in the spiritual traditions of an old man, a teacher of Israel, who knew he would soon die. He loved his homeland, for it was the land of promise, given to the children of promise. It was what grounded him, what gave him a sense of who he was and where he belonged. And as the unknown mystery of death approached him, the old rabbi asked his friends to carry him to the outskirts of that ancient city of Jerusalem and lay him on the hillside just beyond the gates. There, the old rabbi grasped a fistful of that precious soil and happily died. Suddenly he found himself at heaven's gates. God, disguised as a white-haired old man, came to him and said, "Welcome, Rabbi. You have been a faithful teacher of Israel. Come, enter into the kingdom." But as the man approached the gate, the white-haired God said to him, "You must first release the fistful of earth you carry in order to enter this kingdom." The man froze in fear. "Never," he said, thinking of his beloved homeland. Sadly, God departed and left the man alone outside the gates. Years passed timelessly for the rabbi this way, until God once again came to him, this time disguised as one of his good friends, a Pharisee from the old days. They hugged and laughed and reminisced about people and places they once knew. And then at last God said to him, "Well, friend, let us enter into the kingdom." They started forward, arms clasped in friendship, and once again, as they approached the threshold, God asked the rabbi to release the fistful of earth clasped tightly in his hand. And once again, the rabbi reluctantly declined and watched his friend proceed without him. An eon or two passed, and by now the rabbi was haggard and twisted with the years, even in eternity. And a third time God came to him, this time disguised as a young girl. "Oh, grandfather," God said, "we all miss you and want you to come into the kingdom with us. Please, grandfather." The man struggled to his feet with the last of his strength, and as he did so, he loosened his grasp on that fistful of earth from his long-beloved Jerusalem. A gentle breeze blew the remaining bits of earth from his fingers as he hobbled towards the gates. Hand in hand with God, the old teacher entered the kingdom. And the first thing he saw, laying in splendor before him, was the New Jerusalem. If you think the only way to move forward is to cling to the past even more tightly, then the idea of letting go sounds sometimes The only way to move forward is to let go of the past completely and open your hands to receive the future that is waiting. And if you trust that God holds both the past and the future in loving and gracious hands, then the way forward is God's way. The final verse of that hymn we sang at the beginning of worship, do you remember what it says? Though the nations rage from age to age, we remember who holds us fast. God's mercy must deliver us from the conqueror's crushing grasp. This saving word that our forebears heard is the promise which holds us bound, till the spear and rod can be crushed by God, who is turning the world around. My heart shall sing of the day you bring. Let the fires of your justice burn. Wipe away all tears, for the dawn draws near, and the world is about to turn. The world is about to turn. Indeed, the world is already turning. The world has turned a lot. The way forward, it's not the way back. We cannot make the church great again, if indeed it ever was all that great to begin with. All we can do is follow the one who calls us forward. All we can do is trust the one who said, I am the way. If we faithfully follow in that way, if we remember who holds us fast, if we trust the saving word that our forebears heard, even though we stumble, we will find the way forward to be clear and wide. If we do all of that, then I am confident that we will arrive at the place God intends for us, and our hearts will sing of the day God brings. Are you ready to move forward? Then let go, and let's go.